Peter had been dead 4 days when his older brother asked me, at the funeral reception, when I planned to move out of the apartment Peter and I had called home for 18 years. Thomas owned the building and had also lost his business partner. I understood why he needed answers. I simply did not have one to give him. At 61, after a career built around schedules and deadlines, I was about to learn what happened when I refused to let somebody else's urgency choose a date for my life. The church hall still smelled faintly of coffee when Thomas leaned across the folding table. Around us, people balanced paper plates and spoke softly because no one seemed to know how loudly grief was allowed to exist in public. Peter had been buried that morning. Thomas had stood beside me at the cemetery. Now he sat across from me wearing the same dark suit and asked, "When do you think you'll be ready to move out upstairs?" I put down my cup. "Not today, Thomas." His face tightened. "I'm not trying to rush you. You're asking me when I'm leaving my home at Peter's funeral reception." He looked away. For nearly 20 years, Thomas and Peter had run Keating Appliance Repair together in an older brick building in Windsor, Ontario. Thomas owned the building. Peter and I had rented the 2-bedroom apartment above the shop for 18 years under a written arrangement we rarely discussed because it had always worked. The kitchen was narrow, the windows rattled when a delivery truck stopped too hard in the alley. We paid our rent, we lived there, it was home. Peter's death had left Thomas with a real business problem. The shop had lost one of the 2 men who knew every long-time customer, service call and half-finished repair without checking a file. I could understand that without turning it into my emergency. "I need to plan what happens with the shop and the building," Thomas said. "So do I." "That's why I'm asking." "No." "That's why you're asking now." He went quiet. I could see grief underneath the practical urgency, which made the question understandable but not better. For 26 years, I had worked as a school board scheduling clerk. My instinct was to give every problem a date because dates made uncertainty feel smaller. I almost said a month. Then I stopped. I did not know enough to promise anything. "Put whatever you think needs deciding in writing," I said. "Then we'll talk after I've had time to understand it." "How much time?" "I don't know yet." He exhaled, but eventually nodded. When I went upstairs that evening, the silence below the floor was the first thing that felt wrong. Usually, there was a metal drawer, a service van, Peter calling because he had left his lunch on the kitchen counter. Nothing. On the counter sat his household notebook. Car service, furnace check, bathroom fan. 3 ordinary reminders I had known about without ever being the person who noticed them first. I touched the cover. Thomas had asked when I was moving. But standing in that kitchen, I realized I had a more immediate question. I did not yet know how much of our ordinary life Peter had been carrying where I could not see it. The first morning alone, a mechanical click beneath the bedroom floor woke me just after 6. I lay still, listening. For 18 years, sounds from the shop had threaded themselves through our mornings. Peter could identify most of them before I finished asking. This time the click came again, and for half a second I nearly called his name. Instead, I put on my robe and opened his notebook. The last page read, "Car service next month. Furnace check call. Bathroom fan ask Thomas." I stared at the final line. Was the fan our responsibility? The building's? Something Peter handled only because he worked downstairs? I made coffee and began looking through the service cards on the refrigerator and a small folder of building contacts in a drawer. None of it was impossible. That mattered. The problem was not that I could not handle these things. The problem was that I did not yet know which ones were mine, which ones I could learn, and which ones had only looked like household work because my husband worked 1 floor below us. At 9, Thomas sent a message apologizing for the timing of his question and asking to discuss the apartment when I was ready. I wrote back that I would respond after I reviewed what actually needed deciding. Work language, easier than grief language. Near noon, the clicking started again. Instead of sitting upstairs imagining the worst, I went downstairs. Thomas was alone near the rear workbench, sorting service slips. "You hear that?" he asked. "Yes." "Old timer on the compressor." "Shop problem?" "Shop problem." I nodded. "Good." He looked confused. I went back upstairs, opened a new notebook, and wrote "compressor, not mine." It was the first problem I had solved since Peter died, not by fixing it, but by putting it in the right place. Then I kept going. Car service, heating controls, router, prescription reminders, household contacts, delivery access, the bathroom fan. By late afternoon, I had a growing list and a different understanding of the silence. Peter had not left behind one giant missing role. He had left a collection of small routines, some visible and some not. I wrote 4 questions at the top of a fresh page. What has actually changed? What is mine to handle? What can wait? Who actually needs to answer this? Thomas's housing question was still there. But for the first time since the funeral, it was no longer the only question pretending to be urgent. Before bed, I tested one more item from the notebook. The furnace reminder was not a crisis. It was simply a call that had not been made. I found the service number, wrote down the questions I wanted to ask, and scheduled the appointment for the following week. Peter had usually done that before I noticed. Now I had noticed, and that small difference mattered. 3 mornings later, I cleared the kitchen table and wrote 4 headings on separate sheets. Now, this month, needs qualified input, can wait. Scheduling had taught me one rule that people appreciated only when something broke. Not everything that feels immediate belongs first. Funeral paperwork went under now. A few household account changes went under this month. Thomas's question about the apartment went under needs qualified input. I found the written housing arrangement Peter had kept with our payment records and booked an appointment with a qualified community housing professional. I did not go there looking for someone to tell me I could stay forever or that Thomas had done something illegal. I wanted to understand what I needed to know before I gave him any answer. The woman across the desk opened the folder and asked, "What are you hoping to understand?" I almost asked whether Thomas could make me leave. Then I stopped. What do I need to understand before I decide anything? She helped me identify questions, documents, and next steps relevant to my own housing situation. She did not promise an outcome. She did not tell me where to live. That was useful. "Should I give him a date now?" I asked. "Do you have enough information to choose one?" "No." "Then that matters." I wrote the sentence down because it was obvious only after someone else said it slowly. A question asked aloud was not the same thing as a completed process. I also asked what information I should keep together if the housing discussion continued. She suggested organizing the agreement, payment history, contact information, and any written communication so I would not have to reconstruct the same facts while grieving. Back home, I made one folder for housing and left it beside the 4 scheduling pages. The folder did not give me an answer. It gave the question a place to live until I was ready. When I returned home, Thomas was locking the shop. "Useful meeting?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you know what you want to do?" "Not yet." He rubbed his forehead. "I can't leave everything open forever. I'm not asking you to." I held up the folder. "I'm asking us not to turn your planning problem into my emergency." He looked at me, then nodded. "Fair." Upstairs, I moved the apartment question away from the center of the table. Then I turned to Peter's notebook and began writing each recurring responsibility on a yellow index card. 1 card became 5, 5 became 9. By evening there were 15. Seeing them together was unsettling. It looked like a life I had been living without seeing all the moving parts. But the cards also gave me something grief had not: edges. Each task could be named, tested, and put somewhere. If I was going to decide where I could live next, I first needed to know whether I could manage an ordinary home without treating Peter's absence as proof that I could not. The next day, I sorted the 15 cards into 4 groups: can do now, can learn, qualified, or paid help. Not my responsibility. 6 cards went into the first pile almost immediately: utility reminders, prescription dates, insurance renewals, household supplies, service contacts, and appointments. I already knew how to do them. Peter had simply remembered first. 4 went under can learn: tire pressure and washer fluid, the roadside assistance account, the heating controls, and the router. I decided not to let the labels stay theoretical. That afternoon, I took the car manual and a small tire gauge into the parking area. It took longer than Peter would have taken. I checked twice because I did not trust myself. But when I finished, the car was not impressed, and neither was I. It was simply done. The router required a written sequence taped inside the desk drawer, so I would stop unplugging the wrong cable. Also done. 3 cards went under qualified or paid help: regular vehicle service, tax preparation support, and computer repairs beyond basic troubleshooting. My first reaction was embarrassment. Then I remembered I had spent 26 years scheduling specialists for a school board without thinking their expertise made the school board weak. Hiring the right person was still managing a responsibility. I also called the garage Peter had used and asked them to explain the next service interval instead of pretending I already knew it. The woman on the phone did not sound surprised that I asked basic questions. She simply answered them. By the time I hung up, another card had changed from something Peter knew into something I could manage by knowing whom to call. That left 2 cards: shop compressor and timer, and rear delivery access. I carried them downstairs. Thomas was behind the counter. "These are not mine," I said. He read both. "No, Peter handled them. At the shop. Then they belong here." I placed the cards beside his service book. No confrontation, no speech. 2 responsibilities disappeared from my kitchen table because I had finally put them where they belonged. Back upstairs, I counted the piles. 6 I could already do, 4 I could learn, 3 I could manage by using appropriate help, 2 that had never been mine. For days, I had been treating Peter's absence like one enormous hole. The cards showed me smaller gaps with different answers. Some needed practice, some needed a phone number, some needed a professional, some needed a boundary. That evening, when I looked around the apartment, the housing question had changed. I was no longer asking whether I was capable of living alone. I was beginning to believe I was. The question was whether this particular home still fit the life I wanted next. The first apartment I nearly rented would have solved Thomas's problem faster than mine. That was exactly why I almost took it. The listing appeared 10 days after I sorted the yellow cards. 1 bedroom, available immediately. Bus stop nearby. Clean, ordinary, and within the upper end of the rent I had been reviewing. The building manager walked me through the unit and said, "You could move in next week." Next week. The words felt like relief because they would let me call Thomas with a date before I had to sit with any more uncertainty. The apartment itself was fine. Narrow kitchen, laundry on the same floor, exterior maintenance handled by the building. No shop below me, no delivery door. No sounds I might mistake for my responsibility. I opened the notebook I had started carrying and read the 5 questions I had written before the viewing. How would I get groceries? How long to the community centre? What household responsibilities stayed with me? What became building responsibility? Would I choose this place if nobody were waiting for my answer? The last question changed the viewing. Instead of signing the application, I tested an ordinary afternoon. I walked to the nearest grocery store, farther than the listing suggested. I took the bus route to the community centre. One transfer. Awkward timing. My pharmacy was reachable, but inconvenient. None of that made the apartment bad. It made it wrong for the reason I was about to choose it. I sat at a coffee shop near the bus stop with the unsigned application in front of me when Thomas called. Any idea yet? Yes, he straightened audibly. You found something? I found one place. That's good. No. I know I'm not taking it. Silence. Why not? Because I only liked how quickly it solved the question. Thomas did not answer. I continued, if you had never asked me to move, I wouldn't choose this apartment. That doesn't mean you have to stay upstairs. I know. So what does it mean? It means I need a better reason to leave, he exhaled. That's fair. I folded the application and put it back in my bag. On the bus home, the yellow card numbers ran through my head. 6, 4, 3, 2. The apartment above the shop was no longer evidence that I needed Peter to manage a household. But independence did not require me to prove anything by leaving quickly either. At home, I wrote one new word in the notebook, transition. Underneath it, I wrote, how much time do I actually need to choose well? For the first time, I was not waiting for Thomas to give me a deadline. I was preparing to bring him a timeline of my own. 3 weeks after the funeral, I went downstairs after Keating Appliance Repair closed and placed my notebook on the counter. Thomas stood near Peter's old workbench with 3 service slips in one hand and one of Peter's pencils tucked behind his ear. Seeing it there caught me harder than I expected. I almost went back upstairs. Instead, I opened the notebook to the page I had prepared. I worked out what I need. Thomas set the slips down. Okay, 12 weeks. His forehead tightened. To move? To make the decision properly. Arrange the move properly, if I choose it. And stop treating every morning like the last morning I'm allowed to think. He leaned back. That's longer than I hoped. I know. I have decisions to make about the shop. I know that too. He looked toward Peter's empty workbench. Then, for the first time, he described what had been happening downstairs, instead of only asking about upstairs. Peter's calls had become Thomas's. Peter's repair queue had become Thomas's. Staffing had to change. The building plan for the coming year mattered because the business itself was changing. None of those problems were imaginary. They were simply not the same problem as where I should live. I'm not asking you to leave everything open forever, I said. What are you asking? For 12 weeks, where we both know what to expect. I keep paying and handling my ordinary responsibilities. If something genuinely urgent changes, call me. Otherwise, we talk before either of us assumes. He rubbed one hand across the counter. That sounds exactly like something a scheduling clerk would invent. It worked for 26 years. He laughed once. Then his face changed. I should never have asked you at the funeral. No. I thought if I started planning immediately, I could keep everything from falling apart. I understand. That doesn't make it right. No. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Marian. I did not tell him it was fine. It had not been. Thank you, he nodded. 12 weeks. 12 weeks. Back upstairs, I wrote the date at the end of the transition window and underneath it, not a deadline to panic. A window to decide. 4 days later, a new listing appeared. 1 bedroom plus a small den. Older building. No luxury finishes. Building maintenance separate from my unit. Rent somewhat higher than Peter and I had paid, but manageable. The address was about a 10-minute bus ride from the part of Windsor where I already spent much of my week. I printed the listing and set it beside the yellow cards. For the first time, my question was not how quickly I could get out. It was whether I could build an ordinary life there. I viewed the one-bedroom plus den apartment twice. The first visit was for the rooms. The second was for the life around them. I took the bus at the time I normally would. I walked to the grocery store. I checked the route to the community centre. I waited long enough at the stop to find out whether a 10-minute connection on paper felt sensible on an ordinary morning. Nothing was perfect. The kitchen had less counter space. The den was barely large enough for a desk and shelves. The rent was higher, but the building handled exterior maintenance. The responsibilities inside the unit were clear, and the neighborhood still connected me to the routines I wanted. When I returned to the shop that afternoon, Thomas surprised me. "You know you don't have to leave at 12 weeks." I stopped. "What do you mean?" "If you decide you need more time, I can work with it." "How much?" he thought before answering. "Roughly another 6 months. We put it in writing and review after that." The offer changed everything because it removed the thing I had been resisting: pressure. Thomas was no longer giving me a reason to hurry. Staying was genuinely possible. So was moving. That evening, I wrote 2 headings: stay and move. Under stay, familiar rooms, same neighborhood, more time, written extension. Then the costs. Peter's workplace directly below me, the sounds of service vans and metal drawers woven into every day, and a building where home and business would always overlap. Under move. 1 bedroom plus den, 10-minute bus ride, community centre still practical, responsibilities clearly separated. Then the costs. Higher rent, packing 18 years, learning a new building, leaving rooms that held most of my married life. Both choices were reasonable. That was inconvenient. Part of me wanted one option to fail so badly that I would not have to choose. The next morning, I tested the new neighborhood again. Bus, groceries, coffee, community center, back to the apartment, ordinary, manageable. On the ride home, I asked myself one question. Was I staying above the shop because it was still the best home for me, or because Peter had known how everything worked there? I knew before the bus reached my stop. Staying would not be weakness. Moving would not be defeat. Thomas had offered enough time that I no longer had anything to prove by leaving quickly. Because either future was now possible, the choice finally belonged to me. I climbed the stairs above Keating Appliance Repair, opened the door, and looked at the kitchen where Peter's notebook had started all of this. I was going to move, not because Thomas had asked, because I had finally found somewhere I wanted to go. I went back to the new apartment one more time before signing. This time I was not testing the bus. I was testing commitment. I measured the den for my desk. I checked the laundry arrangement, storage rules, utilities, building responsibilities, and practical costs. I reviewed the rental terms carefully before signing anything. The rent was higher than Peter and I had paid. Moving would cost money. Some routines would change. None of those facts disappeared because the decision felt right. What mattered was that I understood what I was agreeing to. I signed. The move-in date fell inside the 12-week window I had chosen. That afternoon, I carried my copy downstairs. Thomas was standing beside Peter's old workbench. "I have a date." He looked up. "You found somewhere?" "Yes." "You signed?" "Yes." "When?" I told him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas looked toward the stairs. "I meant what I said before. About the funeral?" "Yes. I'm sorry." I held his gaze. "You asked a practical question at the worst possible time." "I know. Now I have an answer." He nodded slowly. "Your answer?" "Yes. That mattered more than the date itself. Over the next several weeks, I packed 18 years one room at a time. I made 3 groups: my home, Peter's personal things, shop or building. Anything from the 3rd group went downstairs for Thomas to review. Nothing mysterious appeared. No hidden paper changed my future. Most of our life was exactly what it looked like. Tools, receipts, Christmas decorations, old mugs, 2 lamps neither of us had liked enough to fight about. The yellow cards stayed on the kitchen table while I packed. 6 responsibilities no longer needed cards because I was already doing them. 4 had notes from what I had learned. 3 still had professional contacts beside them. The 2 shop cards were gone. One evening, Thomas came upstairs to collect a box of repair manuals from the hall closet. He looked around the half-empty living room. "Does it feel strange?" "Yes." "Bad?" I folded one moving box shut. "Not exactly." He waited. "It feels chosen." On moving morning, the practical details helped. A neighbor held the front door while the movers carried the desk downstairs. Thomas kept the rear delivery area clear, so nobody had to negotiate with the shop vans. We had finally separated the business from my move well enough that both could happen on the same morning without becoming the same event. On my last evening above the shop, I stood in the kitchen and heard Thomas close a metal drawer downstairs. For 18 years, that sound had belonged to home. By morning, it would belong only to the shop. I slipped the last useful yellow card into my notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. The next day, I locked the apartment behind me, not because somebody had finally made me leave, but because I knew where I was going. 6 months later, the 15 yellow cards had become a much smaller system. My new 1-bedroom plus den apartment was quiet in a different way. No service vans below the bedroom. No delivery door beside the stairs. No metal drawers under the kitchen floor. I missed some of those sounds. I did not miss wondering whether they required something from me. The den became my desk room. The smaller kitchen was easier to manage. I still took the bus to the community centre and bought groceries in the same part of Windsor. My ordinary routines had changed less than I expected. For the first few months, I kept the yellow cards on a corkboard beside my desk. The 6 Can Do Now cards disappeared first, because the tasks became routines again. The 4 Can Learn cards took longer. Tire pressure stopped feeling like a test. I learned how to use the roadside assistance account. The heating controls became ordinary. The router remained irritating, but now it was irritating in a familiar way. The 3 qualified or paid help cards taught me something I had misunderstood about independence. Vehicle servicing still belonged with a mechanic. Tax preparation still deserved appropriate help. If a computer problem exceeded what I could reasonably troubleshoot, I called somebody who knew more than I did. Using expertise was not surrender. Eventually, I copied the useful names and numbers into my household notebook and removed those cards too. The 2 cards that had belonged to the shop never reached the new apartment. Thomas and I spoke occasionally. We did not become close friends simply because grief made us more careful. One afternoon, I stopped by Keating Appliance Repair to return an old backroom key I found in a moving box. Thomas turned it over in his hand. "Peter's. I thought so. He put it in a drawer. How's the apartment?" "Mine." He smiled slightly. "That sounds good." "It is." A few months later, someone at the community centre noticed the system in my notebook, and I was asked to share it in a small, informal session about invisible household work. I gave no legal or housing advice. I simply showed what had helped me. List recurring tasks. Keep useful contacts. Notice invisible work. Separate what you can learn from what needs qualified help. And ask whether a responsibility is actually yours before carrying it. That evening I stood beside the corkboard. Only one yellow card remained. I turned it over. Months earlier, I had written, Not everything that feels urgent belongs to today. Peter had died. The shop had changed. Thomas had asked a question too soon. Eventually, I had answered it. I did move out. I just waited until the date belonged to me.